Things are heating up as Kingdom Come Deliverance 2's release date comes closer, with more information about it being steadily divulged. Continuing on from their previous livestream, Sir Tobi was accompanied this time by the lead designer, Prokop Jirsa, who had a lot to share. For this video, we're going to examine several new observations surrounding melee combat, as well as notable details pertaining to other gameplay features and intricacies. But before we begin, I should inform you about something related to this game's story. If you've been following all the footages and demos that have been released, you already have some idea on what's going to happen during the opening hours of Henry's adventure. However, there are actually some narrative bits out there that were never shown in any of the videos, and I only read about it in an article from Games Radar. I'm not going to spoil what they're about, but if you'd like to know, I left its link down in the description, alongside every other reference that will be shown here. Okay, let's do this. Up until now, we know very little about how Master Strikes will probably work. In the melee combat analysis presentation, I had a hunch that the blue cross swords icon might have something to do with it, but there's also a good chance it's linked to riposts. While in the previous video, we talked about the green shield icon related to perfect blocks, and its glinted counterpart, which most likely indicates when a player presses the defend button. As it turns out, the cross swords also have a glinted version, and it shows up when a riposte is done. So the entire sequence goes like this. The green shield appears when an enemy is about to attack. As its animation is carried out and the player presses block, the icon lights up. Upon weapon contact, the shield is replaced by the swords, and when it's followed up by a riposte shortly afterwards, it also gets lit before quickly fading away. All of these symbols are also present when engaging in a clinch battle, so they're visual prompts for when the player should block and counterattack. Therefore, the sword's icon's chances of being connected to Master Strikes is very slim. For now, the only solid clue we have pertaining to it came from Mr. Jirsa, who said that they're now harder and riskier to do. I can only think of one scenario where both parameters are met, which is if we have to press block at the very last moment before an attack lands. This feature is present in other games, such as Ghost of Tsushima, where actuating the button late means getting hit, but time it correctly and we're rewarded with a powerful automatic counter. The only question here is how a Master Strike is carried out. Do we only need to press the block button, or is there an additional action required, like matching the direction of our opponent's attack? That would make it more challenging indeed. Of course, Master Strikes are considered as an advanced move, so it's most likely one of the skills Henry lost after his shoulder injury. If we take a look at the Player tab, we can see the combat skills have been rearranged. Selections tied to weapons, which consist of combos, now have their own sub-tab, and all of Henry's melee fighting abilities are now indicated within the Warfare panel, including Perfect Block, which used to be separate, as well as an icon for ripostes that didn't exist in the first game. If Henry still knew how to Master Strike even after the incident, it would either be indicated here or within the weapon panels if the developers decide to segregate them per type. But as we can see here, there are no drop-down menus yet. This is of course just an assumption on my part. Perhaps if there's going to be another live stream and Sir Tobi's next guest is Mr. Bohemia, the combat designer and director, we'll probably find out more. So for now, we'll just discuss other aspects of melee combat that were readily perceivable. As we've talked about before, fighting multiple enemies in KCD1 can be very challenging due to their inclination of charging Henry en masse. But in the sequel, foes will now spread out as they carefully approach and try to encircle our character. I still think this is a great way to balance its difficulty, but at the same time, This seems to have caused an issue when a clash takes place on a narrow passageway. In one portion of GameStar Talk's video when Henry fought the two bandits, we can see the enemy on his right side tried following the same protocol of creating some space, and therefore got stuck as he continuously bumped into the nearby objects. The game version Sir Tobi was using back then is called 1CG, and by the time the second stream happened, the pre-release build seems to have received a couple of updates, where the version name is appended with a series of nondescript alphanumeric code. And thank goodness, this issue seems to have been resolved. The bandit no longer tries to brute force their way through nearby obstacles, and instead adapts to the narrow terrain, staying close to his companion while waiting for an opportunity to attack. I'm not sure if enemies could strike simultaneously, but at the very least, we can see during this moment that others will not simply stand around while we engage the one in front of us. If anything, this makes them even more dangerous. So focusing on one while turning our back on another is just asking for a game over screen. Apart from this improvement, the latest version we've seen also rectified an issue with the combat star that used to disappear as we switch between targets. Now it flies across the screen, which should make perfect blocking attacks outside of our view a little bit easier. But even though a large portion of melee combat is going to be a series of exchanges between it and riposts, of course somebody has to start it off. And it's great to know that we can still try initiating an attack through a feint. The only problem is, its effectiveness still needs to be tested, as we've yet to see an enemy do it in a manner that could throw off the timing of our blocks. The same thing goes for dodging actually. According to its description, a well-timed evasion within a perfect block window can render our opponent off-balanced, but we've never seen this happen yet. The only time it was demonstrated for the player side is in the official showcase, and the robed alchemist never lost his footing. He just paused for a split second, long enough for Henry to land a hit at least. For the enemy side, we can see experienced fighters dodge a blow on occasion, but there doesn't seem to be any negative effect on Henry, so we'll need to get our hands on it for a proper evaluation. At the very least, performing evasive moves are now easier, because according to its text, they can be done at any time during a face-off, and it also requires pressing a button while tilting the analog stick. It's a significant improvement from the first game, where you could only do it if an enemy is about to attack, as well as being solely tied to the movement controls. There are actually a lot of these noticeable alterations within KCD2 shown during the second stream, and now that we've covered those ones related to melee combat, we'll talk about the others outside of it next. Apart from battles, this game's difficulty will also partially depend on the ways Henry will be able to make money. In KCD1, the two major sidelines we can do is poaching and thievery, but up until now, we know next to nothing if there are any changes to how stolen items will work. Apart from selling them alongside legitimate ones is apparently a valid strategy. On top of that, we have confirmation that stealth is indeed more difficult if Henry smells bad, as guards can easily sense him if we neglect his cleanliness. At the same time, rules for when knocking out enemies in the first game seem to have been retained, where if our target catches a glimpse of Henry's face, it's guaranteed that he'll be penalized shortly afterwards, as written here on the pause menu tip. Regardless of the activity we decide to do, whether it's burglary or fighting, the thing which can affect both are potions, and we now have a look at how crafting them changed. The first thing I noticed about Alchemy in KCD1 is that this minigame is lenient with regards to brewing time of ingredients. Due to our control over the flames being limited to just stoking it without a way to quickly snuff it out, overboiling herbs beyond the recipe instruction is perfectly fine. But since we now have manual control over the cauldron itself, it makes sense that creating a strong class of potions have tighter manufacturing tolerances. Thankfully, There are also normal and weak types of them, just in case some mistakes were made during production. So it's an interesting compromise between challenge and accessibility. In the tutorial section for it, I think the reason why the chamomile brew was of a normal quality only is because the main ingredients got overboiled a bit. If we review the steps taken, Bohemia instructed Henry to activate the hourglass before lowering the cauldron. But instead of waiting for the timer to run out first, Sir Tobi immediately started pumping the bellows. So when he gave it another whirl and let the mixture boil for the entire duration, the total was 1.5 turns or something close to it. But that's just my guess. Apart from that, I'm also waiting for clarification on how the varying potion qualities actually differ. Towards the end of the stream, Pavlena hinted that Savior Snaps can be used multiple times, so I'm guessing its strong variant has a lot more charges in comparison to the weaker ones. But what about something like Strong Aqua Vitalis? Is its damage reduction value higher than the weaker ones? How about their effective duration? Do they also differ? I'm aching to find out the details about this because if you've played KCD1, you'll know that having the right kind of potions running through Henry's system can make a huge difference in certain situations. There's also a mystery about the herbalism skill, which seems to have disappeared, but when Sir Tobi asked about one of its perks called Flower Power, Mr. Jirsa said it still exists, so I'm guessing it got merged into Alchemy along with the others. Amidst the attention surrounding these big changes coming to KCD2, I would also like to spotlight those minute improvements which add to its overall immersion, such as when Henry eats the stew from a pot and when he washes himself. In the first game, we know most interactions like these are done off-screen, and while this is something players can get used to, it's still commendable that Warhorse Studios put in the effort to make animations for them. There's also a related issue in KCD1 involving plant life, where if we quickly pan the camera to one side, grass and herbs can be seen settling into place at the edge of our screen. Judging by what we're shown in the second stream, this no longer seems to happen. Equally as fascinating to these improvements are the new questions that popped up. For example, while the two presenters were talking about the blacksmithing minigame, Sir Tobi said, "You have to do stuff in order to get stuff." Does that mean we'll have to mine our own metals for forging weapons? That would be interesting. We also have visual confirmation that the thrust attack when using an axe is gone. But the thing is, some of the weapons in the first game, which belongs in this category, have a spiked tip on them designed for stabbing. Have they been removed? But I think the biggest mystery so far has something to do with what seems to be a new type of item. When Sir Tobi looted one of the bandits named Kozliak, he was carrying on him something called a tin badge of advantage, which as you can see here has its own subcategory. So we can rule out the possibility that it's simply a miscellaneous item meant to be sold off. This badge seems to serve a functional purpose. We just don't know what it is and how many of them are there, for now anyway. But as always, I'll keep you updated as answers to these questions are found and when new details are discovered.